Good morning. It is such a joy to be present with you all today in this room, and those of you who are watching online and those who will watch this service in later days or weeks. As normal, I had a plan for today. The surprise I mentioned earlier was not the only surprise that I got, because I thought I knew what I would be sharing with you. And I thought about you all week, and then in the last couple of days, I began feeling as though I didn't want to share what I was going to share. And so, unapologetically, surprise. I had intended to talk to you about fear today, but I felt something a little bit more pressing. And I want to talk to you today about what it means to actually be a peacemaker. We are at this fellowship, Peace Fellowship, and what does that look like in the world? And how do peace and tolerance coexist? So if you're watching online and you don't want to hear about this, you can just log off and walk away. If you're here in person, you can stand up and leave. It'll be a little bit more awkward for you. I'm kidding, the doors are now locked. You can't leave anyway. But I first wanted to do something. I wanted to read the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalists, because you may know them, but you may not. And they are the principles which guide this particular community. The 7 principles are the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. A free and responsible search for truth and meaning. The right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and society at large. The goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, and respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. So theoretically, to be makers of peace, these are the things that we believe in and try to embody individually and collectively as a part of this community. So recently, a stranger on social media was defending a news host who was steadfastly supporting Russian President Vladimir Putin. And he was supporting the continual atrocities being committed in Ukraine. And I'm interacting with a person who's behind this, and this self-identified Christian man pressed forward, and he was strident in his support of that person's support. And I questioned how a faith-based argument could be made for this kind of advocacy of violence. And he gave me a reply that I have heard a few thousand times in similar situations. And the reply was, "Oh, you liberals are so tolerant unless someone disagrees with you." He was weaponizing the idea of tolerance, knowing that it's something that I would say that I believe in as a value. But that's not how this works. Now, I don't know if you embrace the labels of liberal or progressive or left-leaning for yourself. I don't know if you are part of the radical left. I have a feeling you are, at least to some people. But I imagine you're here in this community, in this room, or you're watching online, and you consider yourself fairly committed to diversity and to justice and to equity, right? Which makes you committed to humanity and to having peace among the humanity that you share this place and time with. And this also means you are on the front lines of what it means to be a peacemaker in a world of fear-bringers. And one of the greatest lies that people propagate is that all opinions are valid, that every position is somehow equally worthy of merit and deserving of consideration. We're often led to believe that in every situation in which we reach an impasse with someone, that the most humane response is to agree to disagree. I rarely agree to disagree. I agree to acknowledge that something is wrong, and we have to keep talking about why it's wrong. Agreeing to disagree, it sounds like a noble conclusion, but in reality, that isn't always true. Often, agreeing to disagree is actually cowardly or dangerous. And in situations where other people's lives are in the balance, it can actually be deadly. I think the idea that being open-minded means being passive and permissive is often weaponized by people in times of conflict. It's a tried and true conversation stopper, a supposed kind of gotcha attempt to shame people like us into silence and submission, as if loud and sustained opposition to anything is somehow an inconsistency that reveals our hypocrisy. So for you to be loud, that means you're not loving. And I don't believe in that. I believe that sometimes love is called to be loud so that it can be clearly heard in a world where hatred is trying to be louder. And it's not a requirement of tolerant people to tolerate everything equally. Our patience and our understanding and our forbearance are not infinite. They do have limits. We can, friends, be open to hearing someone's story and then conclude once we've heard that story that something in that story has yielded a position that is too hateful or violent for us to presently bear. We can be accepting of a wide swath of worldviews and belief systems and attitudes, and we are, but we can also declare some of them are a bridge too far for us. Some of them we can declare we don't want proximity to. We can be really good listeners and eventually decide that what we've heard as we listen is fully abhorrent and not within the parameters of our morality. Saying that we believe in diversity, it doesn't come with the expectation that we will object to nothing and that we will abide everything. Actually, it's quite the opposite. Precisely because disparate humanity is so important to us and peace among that disparate humanity is so important, then we can and we should come to the conclusion that certain beliefs or legislations or movements or sometimes even people are antithetical to the peace in the world and adversarial to humanity. So supporting a murderous dictator as he slaughters residents of a neighboring country by the thousands is not a valid opinion. Dehumanizing young people for their gender identity or sexual orientation and celebrating legislation that preys upon them is not a valid opinion. Justifying a violent insurrection because you don't like the outcome of the election is not a valid opinion. Defending the murders of people of color because you have unrepentant racism that devalues their actual worth is not a valid opinion. Philosopher Karl Raymond Popper says, the so-called paradox of freedom is the argument that freedom, in the sense of absence of any constraining control, must lead to very great restraint. Less well known is the paradox of tolerance. Unlimited tolerance must lead to the disappearance of tolerance. If we extend unlimited tolerance even to those who are intolerant, if we're not prepared to defend a tolerant society against the onslaught of the intolerant, then the tolerant will be destroyed and tolerance with them. What Popper is saying is that someone has to be in the place to defend that which deserves defense. There are many positions that decent people should disqualify, that humanity should not tolerate, right? We are here at this place in time to be the arc benders, to bend the moral arc of the universe toward justice, and it doesn't happen by simply abiding everything. Yes, countless perspectives on international conflicts or gun control or government spending or environmental dangers are within the confines of what our tolerance will and should accommodate, right? We do want dialogue. We do want differing ideas. We do want the tension of belief systems that comes when you're in diverse community. But we're not required to hold all things. We can disagree on all sorts of issues without that disagreement being a deal breaker, right? We have friends and family members and social media friends and coworkers and classmates who we disagree fundamentally with, and we can still be in relationship with and still be in a place of proximity and respect. But there are some things that as people of faith and morality and conscience, we simply will not allow. This isn't a betrayal of our progressive stance. It's actually an affirmation of it. This is who we are as peacemakers. And here's why this matters, friends. When we tolerate hateful political affiliations or theological positions, we abide violence against those that those beliefs impact. So this is the tension that you're in. It's the one that peacemaking will always have us in. We're doomed to sit in the tension between our relationships and our convictions. We are always going to be placed between who we love and what we believe, and try to sit with both of those. We're always going to be in the tension between people and principles. The cost of authenticity and speaking into the injustices around us will sometimes be the loss of proximity with people whose convictions are antithetical to ours. In our circles of influence, we often need to advocate for people who are not represented in those conversations or spaces. An old friend reached out to me recently, and he's fully embraced a political ideology that I cannot. And he wrote to me and he said, "Our friendship is worth more than politics." I don't know if you agree with him, but I wasn't sure that I agreed with him. Because he's now against vaccines and voting rights and immigrants and LGBTQ people, and his beliefs and his social media posts and his behavior and his voting is adversely affecting people I have a deep respect and love for. And I think all of the people that he is hurting might be worth more than this single friendship. Many times we have to try and preserve a relationship without losing our authenticity. You don't understand what that's like. Do I hold my tongue? Do I speak now? Do I appear angry? Do I create confrontation? What do I do? We always have to weigh our responsibility to people we know and love with people we don't know but are still connected to by the fact that we share the planet with them. Here's the way I want you to think about this, friends. If I told you there are 4 women named Maria, and I asked you, are all 4 of those Marias of the same inherent worth? I know you would say, yes, they are. But now realize that one Maria is your family member or a good friend. One Maria is a transgender teenager living in Florida. One Maria is a Mexican migrant at the border, and one Maria is a mother in Ukraine. Are all these Marias of the same inherent worth? Yes, they are, but here's the problem. We easily act as though the Maria that we know, our friend or family member, is the most important, and we try to preserve the peace there while neglecting the peace for those other Marias. It's easy to think that proximity means that person is more important. And what true peacemakers do is we think about the people not present in those conversations and those relationships. The Maria you know may actually be the most privileged and the least threatened. And that's what we want to consider. How do we love people who are close to us while representing the other Marias? Because interdependent community means that they matter to us. So being a peacemaker, here's what I think it means. I think it does not require vulnerable or marginalized people to endure violence. Being a peacemaker means we bring peace to the most affected by turbulence, which means in our interactions, we almost always want to err on the side of the historically vulnerable and marginalized and oppressed. Being a peacemaker does not mean having relational or physical proximity to toxic people all the time. You can love people and love them from a distance. And it doesn't mean silence in the face of injustice to be a peacemaker. It does not mean softening our language or abiding active bigotry and discrimination. So here, what can we do? What can we do to be true peacemakers? We err on the side of the marginalized. And we fight niceness addiction. You are nice people. But niceness is not always loving. I come from the Christian tradition of Jesus, and he was always loving, and he wasn't always nice. I was at a church speaking a couple of years ago, and we were talking about issues of equity and peacemaking and diversity and justice, and this woman said, "John, but we're nice people, and we're known as a nice church." As if there were churches that advertised that they weren't nice. We're the horrible people, come on. And she said, we believe in justice and equity, but we want to be nice. And I said, well, nice is nice, but you could also be radically loving. And in that case, I said, you could be Christ-like. And often, our niceness addiction overwhelms our commitment to be passionate on behalf of other people. So fight niceness addiction. Third, I want you to embrace clarity and specificity. If I say to someone on social media, I believe in family, and they say, I believe in family too, but their idea of family does not include LGBTQ couples, we don't agree on family. So specificity matters, and in that case, I need to fight to have clarity. And something else I want you to do this week, wisely steward your anger and your grief. These are heavy days. You're experiencing loss, you're experiencing fear, you're experiencing emotional fracture, and yet you can channel those into something that's redemptive. So showing up on Monday for the Moral March, that may be something that you do to tangibly say, I'm going to take my fear, I'm going to take my anger, and I'm going to do something redemptive with it. But most importantly, in all these things, I want you to remember the center. What is at the center of our journeys here? It's not politics, and it's not theology, and it's not ideals. It's human beings who are assailed by what is happening in the world, and we get to step into that space. That's why we're peacemakers. Remember the center. Remember that we're talking about more than just the Maria you know, but the transgender teenager in Florida, and the Mexican woman at the border, and the mother in Ukraine, and millions of other Marias. I love you as a community because I know what you value. Sometimes we're called, because of what we value, to enter into the fray and into the turbulence and into the unrest. Be lovingly intolerant this week.